As I mentioned earlier this week, a lot of the focus these past few days is on Judas, the betrayal of Judas, and why it is that he betrays our Lord, or the reasons as to why he betrays our Lord. And notice that in the different gospel readings, there's slightly different variations. So, for example, in one of the Gospels, Christ says, when they ask, who is it? And Christ says, it's the one to whom I give this morsel of bread. But here he says it's the one who dips his hand into the bowl with me is the one who will betray me. Now, notice how our Lord, when he reveals to them, one of you will betray me, they all become distressed and began to say one after another, surely not I, Lord. And Judas himself, at some point, says, surely not I, Rabbi. And it's almost like he's not even paying attention to what's going on. He's just repeating what everybody else is saying. He doesn't realize what he's doing. So the question that people often ask is, why did Judas betray our Lord? What are the reasons behind it? And it's possibly a number of reasons. It's speculation. We heard how he was a thief. He stole from the money bag. Also, John's Gospel, chapter 6, it seems that he's one of the ones who didn't believe that our Lord could actually give his flesh to us to eat. So he didn't trust Christ fully, and yet he stayed with Christ. Some would even argue, well, since he was in charge of the money bag, he stayed because he could help himself to the money. But he had witnessed the miracles of Christ, and all of these things should have convinced him, and to a certain extent probably did, that he is the Messiah, or at least that God is acting through him. Now, often when we betray someone, it's because we're angry with that person or we don't like that person. So some speculate that when Jesus was having dinner with Martha, Mary, and Lazarus, and Mary poured the costly ointment on Jesus' feet, and Judas says, why wasn't this sold and the money given to the poor? And our Lord, in a sense, rebukes Judas. And because of his pride, he may have taken that too hard and was resentful and wanted to get back at our Lord. So that's a possible reason. One of the other reasons that a lot of people put forward is that Judas did believe, to a certain extent, that Jesus is the Messiah, but he felt that he was going about it the wrong way, that he needed to convince the Jewish authorities. So Judas probably thought, look, if I hand him over to the Jewish authorities, he will be forced to be interrogated. He will be forced to have to answer their questions, and they will see his wisdom. They will see that he is who he claims to be. And of course, when this doesn't follow through as Judas had planned, he becomes discouraged. He realizes he made a huge mistake, and it's only then that he kind of comes to his senses and sees the huge mistake he has done. And so he resorts to suicide, thinking that there's no hope for him. So in other words, he doesn't understand what Christ is like. He doesn't understand that, for example, St. Peter pledged to be faithful to Christ even to death, and yet Christ said 3 times, you will deny me this night. And, so he should have trusted in God's mercy. So there's these reasons, as we mentioned, but the reality is that because Judas was a sinner, he stole from the money bag. He was probably full of pride, didn't believe everything our Lord was saying, so he thought he knew better. He wanted to do it his way instead of God's way. So he's totally blind to what he's doing. And at some point when he really realizes, that's when it's too late for him. He could have repented, but he doesn't, because he doesn't know God. In his blindness, he didn't know the mercy of God. And that's why he gives in to despair, which of course the evil spirits want him to do. And so he ends up committing suicide. Now, what is the takeaway from all of this? Sin blinds us, number one, especially when we give in to pride, okay? So sin blinds us, but the other thing is that often we want to do things our way. And the reality is that when it comes to the church, one of the things that is emphasized in the church, especially in religious orders, is the virtue of obedience. When we are obedient, we are on the right track. Even if our superior makes a mistake and we just follow his orders, we're not sinning, even if it were something wrong. I mean, if it's clearly sinful, we obviously can't do that. But if our superior makes a mistake, then we're not gullible, we're not blameworthy, because we're just doing what we were told to do. So obedience, and recall that it was the sin of disobedience, the sin of Adam and Eve, that led to our downfall. So Christ is obedient unto death. Our Lady was totally obedient to God, even as she stood at the foot of the cross, accepting the crucifixion as the will of God. So obedience is key. In other words, we submit to God and to his legitimate authority, in other words, the leaders of the church, okay? One could argue that, somebody could tell us to commit sin, and of course we cannot do that. But obedience is so, so important. And the danger is when we just want to do things on our own. So when we are in the position of having to make an important decision, we need to pray about it. Sometimes we need to consult with experts. Sometimes we need to get advice from a priest, especially if somebody's thinking of a vocation to the priesthood or to the religious life. So God guides us, and it's by means of obedience to him that we attain our salvation. And God does reveal things to us directly. I've mentioned this so many times, sometimes God might be inspiring us to give up certain things that we're doing. May not necessarily be sinful, but maybe we're overindulging in entertainment or scrolling or looking at YouTube videos or whatever it may be, and neglecting our prayers or spiritual reading or other good things that we might be doing. So how obedient are we to God? Are we willing to be obedient to God in all respects? Now, recall with Judas, his intention at the start was not to betray Christ. His intention was probably like the other apostles, to become a faithful apostle, which is what we're striving to do. But the danger is we start giving in to sin. It might be just little sins, it might be little doubts, but over time it could become bigger and bigger, and the reality is that we too can betray Christ. We too can betray our faith.